Interview with Jeannie Gainsburg, author of The Savvy Ally, a guide for becoming a skilled LGBTQ+ advocate. All right, so hello, my name is Jennifer Shelsball. My pronouns are she, her, and I am Janice DeRoche, and my pronouns are she, her. And we are the co-founders of Chapters for Change, which we founded back in July of this year, 2021. And our mission is to help to dismantle racism, prejudice, and discrimination through education. And the way that we do that is by providing suggested books for reading for both adult and young readers, and also educational resources that go along with those books. So really our vision is to educate more people, to push educators to educate themselves and spread the word within their schools and within the communities, and really work toward ending all forms of hate together. Yes, and we also wanted to acknowledge today, November 8th, marks Intersex Day of Remembrance, Day of Solidarity. Today, we want to commemorate the lives of those who are no longer with us and the ones that are currently experiencing persecution or live in environments of fear, hate, secrecy, and shame. We would also like to acknowledge that November 13th to 19th is Transgender Awareness Week, which shines a light on the transphobic violence, and it leads up to Transgender Day of Remembrance on November 20th, which is a day to remember those who have been murdered as a result of transphobia, and a day to draw attention to the continued violence endured by transgender people. So today we are welcoming Jeannie Gainsburg, author of The Savvy Ally, a guide for becoming a skilled LGBTQ+ advocate. Jeannie has a BA in psychology and an MA in social work and social research. She is the founder of Savvy Ally Action, an award-winning educational trainer and consultant in the field of LGBTQ+ inclusion and effective allyship, and the former director at the Out Alliance in Rochester, New York. Jeannie is also the recipient of the Empire State Pride Agenda's Community Companion Award in 2015, the Rochester LGBTQ Community Appreciation Award in 2019, as well as the Distinguished Educational and Human Rights Services Award in 2019. She has facilitated over 600 training and workshop sessions and has inspired other allies like us to facilitate workshops, book clubs, and learning circles while using her phenomenal book. So thank you, Jeannie, so much for writing this amazing resource and for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely welcome. The only thing I just want to clarify is that I was not the director of the Out Alliance. I was the education director at the Out Alliance.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, yep.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I do have to tell you, Jeannie, this book changed my life. It is so amazing. I wish that I had this guidebook years ago and that it was in my pocket and that I could have referred to it, 15 plus years ago. It's such an amazing resource and such an amazing tool for advocates, allies, as well as members of the 2S LGBTQAI+ community. So, just an amazing resource. Can you tell us what inspired you to write this book and what inspired the title of the book?
Sure. And it's funny that you said, I wish I had this years ago, because that's kind of what inspired me to write the book, was that I wish I had that guidebook years ago when I started. I knew nothing about the LGBTQ+ communities, and I really wanted that guidebook to tell me what to do and what not to do and how not to mess up. So yeah, a little bit about why I wrote the book and the title. I worked, as you mentioned, as the education director at our local center here in Rochester, New York. So I'm in upstate New York. It's called the Out Alliance, and I worked there for 15 years. And my final 5 years, I was the education director, which put me in charge of crafting all of their curriculum and basically running all of their workshops and trainings, and also training all of our speakers. So by the time I was done with that job and felt like I was ready to move on, I had such an amazing like wealth of information in my head as far as how to be an ally. And before I even thought about writing a book, interestingly, I kind of wanted to just get it all down, because I had left previous jobs in other areas before, and I was shocked at how quickly I lost that information. You know, you use it or you lose it. And I just was like, I don't want to lose this information. So before book was even on my radar, I just started writing this stuff down on my computer just to get it down there, because I'm like, this is good stuff. I need to have it for, you know, future. And at some point it just clicked, like, I should put this in a book. This needs to get out there. And so then I looked around to see what else was out there, because I had no intention of reinventing the wheel, and writing a book was never on my radar. And so I was like, well, maybe this book exists. So I looked out there to see what there was, and I really didn't find the book that I was looking for. And I'll just briefly share why I think my book is different than what's out there. And there are tons of great books out there. They're just very different. So most of the books that I found that said they were for how to be an ally ended up being like 80% why to be an ally, and then like these action pieces like in the final chapter. And I was like, I really want my book to be 100% how to be an ally. If you pick my book up, I want you to be like already on board and understanding why LGBTQ plus inclusion is important, and you just want the tools. So that was the first thing. The second thing was I really wanted my book to be accessible and fun, like a book that people want to read rather than like this big academic book that you have to slog through. Not that they were all like that, but a lot of them were very high level. And I wanted my book to resonate with like anybody, you know, teachers, nurses, counselors, parents. And then finally, I really wanted my tone to be non-judgmental and forgiving. And I did find that in many books, but in some books, I find that they really seem almost shaming. Like, you have to, you know, do this 24/7, and you have to, you know, like, you can't make any mistakes. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is not how being an ally is. Like, we're gonna make mistakes. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I really wanted it to just be like, just be kind to yourself. You're a work in progress. We all are. And so that was really what I wanted to do. And so I wrote the book. The title, I just really wanted sort of a punchy title. I actually had two publishers that were interested in my book, which was super flattering. And one of them wanted to change it to how to be an ally to the LGBTQ plus communities. And I was like, well, that doesn't really roll off your tongue like the savvy ally. So I don't know. I liked the savvy ally. I liked what I could do with it as far as I, you know, created my own small business and called it Savvy Ally Action. And I just kind of thought that worked. So.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, and we love the title too, and it really can draw people in. And your book is extremely accessible when reading it, easy to understand and follow, which is great, because when you're getting bogged down with, you know, a lot of academic texts that are out there, it can kind of miss the point of moving toward action, which your book really focuses on, is the action piece there, which we love.
Thank you. And actually, can I just say one more quick note?
Yeah, for sure.
I know you're coming to me from the Toronto area, and I just want to make sure whoever's listening understands that I don't mean any disrespect by using the initialism LGBTQ plus. That's really the initialism that's taken hold, at least here in upstate New York, as the most common initialism. But I noticed in some of your writing that you're using 2S LGBTQIA plus. Is that kind of what's taken hold in the Toronto area?
So it is different depending on the area, and it's constantly changing, right? So
right.
The reason why we put the two-spirit first is to just show respect for the Indigenous peoples who were here first before us. So that's why we have that at the beginning. And then just trying to get as many initials in there as possible, but it is constantly changing. I know, Jeannie, we're you know, updating and changing all the time. But
and of course, you run into that when you write a book, because that's out there and it's stagnant, right? It's like, anyway, I just wanted to address that. I want to make sure everyone knows that I don't mean any disrespect if I'm using an initialism that doesn't resonate with other people. So I had to make
for sure. And then things would be updated as time goes on. Like, things are constantly changing, right? And yeah, so yeah, no disrespect at all there, Jeannie.
Thanks.
And we come from an education background. We're both educators. Can you speak to a little bit, maybe we'll just hone in on the education field and in schools. how we can create safer, more inclusive school environments. So do you have any like tips of what educators can be doing? We talked a little bit about, the learning circles that can take place using the book and walking through the book and thinking of action pieces, but maybe just speak to some of those action pieces that can be integrated into schools.
Sure. Yeah, I actually do a lot of work with K through 12 schools. I mean, if I only had sort of one thing to tell every teacher in the world, it would just be to consciously look at ways that you can ungender your language, your expectations, the way the group, the children. I think it's, I mean, I can't say enough about how ungendering. So actually, as I'm doing this work, I'm finding more and more studies that are helping me even understand the impact of gendering in the classroom. And so you look at something as simple as like, let's line up boys and girls, which, traditionally was a very common thing to do in elementary schools. And I know some teachers still do it. And of course, I immediately think about the poor non-binary child who's like, I'm literally not sure which line to get in. But I recently read some studies that showed that teachers that highlight gender in these ways, simply by just separating by gender or, doing teams by gender, the kids in those classrooms end up reinforcing gendered stereotypes much more heavily than they do in the classes where the teachers are not gendering. So I'm like, this stuff affects all of our kids. We're all being boxed into these sort of gendered, expectations of what's okay and what's not okay. And the kids are literally doing what I call gender policing. You need to act more like a boy, you need to act more like a girl. And so I think ungendering is so critical, not just for our transgender youth, but for everybody. I think none of us can actually be authentic with the way that we tend to push people into gendered boxes. And then, of course, it is more inclusive when you're saying things like, take this home to your adults or your parents or guardians rather than your mom and dad, because not everybody has mom and dad. And then of course that goes beyond, if you have two moms or two dads, you may also be being raised by a grandparent or a single parent or a foster family. And so again, like how many kids actually have mom and dad in the white picket fence these days? There's so many varieties of what makes a family. So those little things. And then are we ungendering our activities? Are we still having like the father-daughter dance? Because that's of course exclusive of a lot of families. Are we gendering things that make absolutely no sense? Like graduation gowns, like oftentimes the colors are like royal and gold. And it's like, well, the girls are going to wear gold and the boys are going to wear royal. Like, why? Like this, there's no reason at all to gender graduation gown colors, right? Either let the children all pick the color they want or just go with one of the colors, with a gold trim or whatever. I've seen like restroom keys, pink and blue. And it's like, these are just like, step back and think like, are there reasons why we're gendering this stuff? And then beyond that, of course, I need to throw out just how critical I think the creating inclusive curriculum is. I mean, I think we spend so much time, I think, in K through 12 schools when we think about LGBTQ plus inclusion and advocacy, we spend so much time on sort of bullying, like the problem. And the bullying is just like this eruption over a non-inclusive school. And so if you actually create the inclusive school, the bullying is going to go away. So dealing with the bullying is not actually creating an inclusive school. It's just dealing with this problem that's erupting. So, if we start reading, again, books in even as young as if kids are in preschool, kindergarten, you start reading books about what makes a family, and you're reading about all different kinds of families, and you're introducing them to the fact that some kids have two moms at home or two dads. That's normalizing LGBTQ plus people and families to the point where it's going to be a non-issue as these kids grow up, and that teasing is going to go away because it's going to become so normal. So I think there are so many ways that we can include, LGBTQ plus folks in the curriculum in a normalized way. As I said, starting even in pre-K or kindergarten. I could probably go on for about 2 hours about, what teachers can do, but those are some of my favorites and some of my biggies.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and one of the pieces too that we wanted to touch on was pronouns, because that's something that is showing up more and more that a lot of people still don't understand. So we had for this year the International Pronouns Day fell on October 20th, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's the
right,
third Wednesday, I believe it is.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, in October.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't understand the meaning of the day, but it is becoming more understood. And at Georgian College, within the GCSA in Barrie, what is that? It's the graduate.
It's looking at our Georgian College Student Association.
Yeah. And they created pronoun stickers that faculty could put onto their name tags, which I thought was excellent. But if you want to speak to that just a little bit, Jeannie, for people who are wondering why are pronouns tacked on to the end of names?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see, and I love that both of us have ours here. And I actually get the question a lot, like, should I share 2 or 3? And I see you shared 2 and I shared 3. And I actually have investigated that because so many people have asked me, or should I share 1? And there seems to be absolutely no consensus, at least in my area. What I'm hearing is that all the cool kids are only sharing 2. So I think I'm a little bit dated.
Really?
Yeah. Cool. That's what I hear. Like the youngsters are like, yeah, we're just sharing 2. So I don't know. I mean, I may adjust this, but I actually like to share 3 in that I like to model for folks who kind of have to share 3 and that people don't always know how to use it. You know, if your pronoun is like Z, for example, you're not going to necessarily know how to refer to that person in the different tenses. And they might be someone who feels like they have to share all 3. And I was mirroring that. But now I'm seeing more often people are sharing like multiple pronouns. And then of course you can't, that gets a little ridiculous to share 3. So it's just, there seems to be no consensus. But back to your question, I'll use myself. So I'm someone who moves through the world and people assume that my pronouns are she, her, and hers, as I have listed here. And they're right. Like I hardly ever get misgendered ever. And so people often ask, like, why is she? Like, isn't that obvious? Why are you sharing your pronouns? I think it's a really, really powerful ally action. And the reason that I share my pronouns, there's actually lots of reasons, but I think the main one is it just normalizes this behavior for others whose pronouns aren't so obvious. Like, how awkward would a world be? Can you imagine if it's only the people whose pronouns aren't necessarily obvious, or maybe only the trans folks who are walking around with pronouns on their shirts? Like, that's so awkward. I mean, if we all normalize this behavior and wear like a pronoun pin or a pronoun tag on our name tag, we're gonna nail it every time. We're never gonna misgender anyone, right? It's just gonna be so simple. And I just think it's so kind of unfair that we just expect people to, well, just share your pronouns if it's not obvious. Like it's so awkward. So I think sharing pronouns is very important. It's funny, I often get the question like, why are pronouns so important? I'm like, pronouns are actually important for all of us. It's just that most of us have the privilege of moving through the world and having our pronouns guessed correctly. So we don't realize how important they are. We'd realize really quickly how important they are if you walk around the world and people use the wrong pronoun for you. You know, if people used he for me, and I'd be like, you know, then all of a sudden I'd be very aware of how important pronouns are. So I just think that modeling of pronouns, sharing of pronouns, just makes it so much easier for others and normalizes that behavior. And just make sure that we get it right like every time. And in fact, I think Zoom and these other online platforms are so incredible for that, because you're literally looking at the person's name and pronoun, so easy to get it right. So yeah, I think more interesting, and actually it's interesting that you mentioned International Pronouns Day. So one of the things that I do is I create these little 3-minute videos. I don't know if you had a chance to look at any.
Oh yeah, we saw that one. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So for the International Pronouns Day, I created one on like how to actually gather pronouns without making it awkward, because we talk so often about like it's important to ask people for their pronouns, but when I actually think about it, I don't think I've ever actually said, what are your pronouns to someone? Because I think that's I think we shouldn't be asking people directly what their pronouns are, because it really puts them on the spot. So we don't talk a lot about how do we actually gather pronouns in a way that's, you know, respectful and isn't awkward. And so I created a video that talks about that as well. So
yeah, that was an excellent video as well. And you know, even simple things like what we've done, you know, during the Zoom meeting, adding pronouns, or you know, at the end of emails with your name, and then it can promote pronoun use further and make people feel more comfortable to share their pronouns. And hopefully, yeah, it would get to a point where everybody freely shares them, so that it's not awkward for those who the pronouns may not be as obvious.
Yeah.
And in addition to acknowledging pronouns, it's also so important to acknowledge various identities within the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. Jeannie, what might you say to someone who asks, why do we need all of these identities? Can't we all just be human?
Yeah, which actually I hear not only from straight cisgender folks, but from people actually in the LGBTQ plus communities. I hear that question too. So it's interesting. A lot of people are like, enough already, So what I would say is that I get it, and I actually wish we could all just be human and forget all of these identities, but we're not there yet. And what I mean by that is, I hope that someday I'll live in a world where everybody can just be themselves and we don't need all these identities, but right now we actually do. And one of the things that I share in my book to help explain why identities are so important for people is I share a story about a woman named Dee, who is a trans woman who originally was from the Philippines. And it just makes so much sense to me why those identity words are critical to have, and why we need more of them, not fewer. So Dee grew up in the Philippines, and she said that in the Philippines, they don't have a word specifically for a gay man, a cross-dressing man, a trans woman. They're all lumped together in this word called bakla. So basically anyone who is assigned female anyone who's assigned male at birth, but behaves in any way that according to their society and culture is feminine, gets lumped into this word bakla. So she basically kind of gravitated towards this group of kids who were bakla, and most of them were gay young men. And she's a trans woman, but she has no idea she doesn't know that word, right? And so she's like, well, I guess I'm a gay guy. It was sort of the closest thing she could find to who she was, but she kind of knew this isn't quite right. This isn't quite it. Like, it makes more sense than these other identity word. But so she went on for the longest time having no idea who she was, why she felt so different, even among this group of people that kind of fit for her, until she learned English and she learned the word trans woman. And it was like a light bulb goes off, and she, this amazing moment of like, oh my gosh, like I have found my identity, I've found my people. And then of course she moved forward in her process of coming out, because now she knows who she is. She knows who she can reach out to get more information on her identity. And I just think, that kind of story makes so much sense to for those of us who have always felt like we had our identity in place. Basically, this question comes from people who were like, my identity is locked in, right? Like, I'm comfortable with I have my identity word or words, but trying to understand what it's like to not have that identity word and then find it, I think is so critical to keep in mind. So I think at this point, people, it is so critical for people to find not only their identity, but their group, their like who I belong to. And we're just seeing more and more and more, because we need more words. I mean, if you think about even something like, a non-binary person who's only attracted to women, you know what I mean? I think there's a term for that, a new term for that. I don't even know what it is, but it's like that person's not a lesbian, for example, because they're non-binary. Like, what word would they, you know what I mean? It's like the more we sort of discover about ourselves in this beautiful way of variety, the more words we actually need. And I also just want to say that I really love educator tips. One of my things that I really get jazzed about is sort of how do we effectively educate others, which I think is a huge part of being an ally. So I want to share a behind the scenes tip about the way I answered that question. Basically the first thing I did when that person said, I don't get it, why can't we all just be human, was I used a connecting statement. I said, I get it. Like, I also wish we could all be human. And then I went on to explain why we're not quite there yet. And those connecting statements, I think, are so critical when we talk with others, because rather than me being sort of up on this pedestal and educating you, like I'm now exactly at that person's level. It's like, I get it. I've been there. I wish we could just be human. And it just takes away any like shame that they might feel about their question or discomfort. And it just puts us at the same level. So I think those connecting statements are huge when you're talking with people who think differently than you do, or who just kind of don't get it.
Yeah, for sure. And exactly like you said, by using connecting statements and being on the same level, as opposed to yeah, whenever there feels like there's like this
Hierarchy
yeah,
almost.
like a pedestal or someone
Yeah.
above you, then people can get defensive. And what were some, like, one of the other things I was going to touch on that kind of relates to this is when people are called out for maybe using the wrong words or acting in a way that it is discriminating.
Mhm.
Oftentimes people may become defensive. They may then focus on, oh well, my intent was this, and not focusing on the damage that has been done due to the words that were said or the actions that were done. People often try to think of a quick fix as opposed to further educating themselves. So do you have any suggestions for people, because it happens to all of us, where there'll be times when we're called out, and then we're left to decide, how should I react in this situation? So what advice would you give to people when they're called out?
Yeah, sure. And actually, well, so let me just sort of finish up with when we're in the educator seat. This is a great example of the connecting statement that I would use in this situation. If I messed up in the same way, that's what I would offer. So, you know what I mean? Like if someone used it like maybe an outdated word that they aren't familiar with, starting with that, like, oh my gosh, I used to use that word all the time, and then here's what I learned, is a great way to connect with that person so that they're not just feeling really like awful for using this word, like a terrible human being. But to answer your question, I think probably the best way to respond initially when someone calls you out or calls you in on something that you did is to thank them. Even if it's not your instinct's probably like, but I didn't mean it that way. I'm not homophobic. I'm not racist. Thank you. I think goes so far. Just get that out there first, because I think difficult conversations are just that. They're difficult, but this person is actually taking the time and the energy to offer you a piece of education. And in the long run, you should be very, very thankful for that, even though initially you're feeling like, what is this person going to think about me, whatever. But so thanking that person for just taking the time to share with you that information, I think is important. But I also want to focus, and so I agree with you. I think that the focus should mostly be on the impact. But I don't think it should be 100% on the impact. And the reason I say that is I think we should allow people the kindness of being able to say, oh my gosh, I didn't mean it that way. Like, I think that there's value in letting people just have that moment, because we kind of need to. And in fact, I will sometimes even say when I'm making an intervention like that, I know you didn't mean it to be hurtful, and just kind of get it right out there so the person knows that I know that that wasn't their intent. But I think just sort of like pushing intent aside is a little bit unfair to people. There's a reason we all want to say, I didn't mean it that way, because we didn't. We feel terrible when we're hurtful to people. And so do give people the respect of letting them talk a little bit about their intent, of course, and then you get into the impact and what the words meant to you, or sort of what a better word choice is, why you don't like the word they used, or whatever it is that they did. So those are some quick suggestions.
Yeah, that's awesome, Jeannie. And I think too, like you had mentioned, calling someone out versus calling someone in. And for those who might be watching, just to clarify, so when we're calling someone out, it can often be seen as something that's like vocal. It could maybe be in the moment. Calling someone in is more intimate, and especially as educators, I would suggest calling someone in. So that would be like pulling them aside, speaking to them privately about what was said or done, so that they can reflect on it, and it's not kind of embarrassing them maybe in front of the group if it happened to occurred in a group or something like that. So yeah, excellent examples there. Yeah, Jeannie, thank you so much.
Yeah, one of my favorite tips for when you're the educator is to put yourself in the hot seat before you even go into that situation. So think about a time when someone called you out or in,
Yeah.
Or just what kind of respectful communication would you want if you were in that hot seat? And most of us, of course, don't want to be called out in public, right? Well, it's so shaming, or called out on social media, or yelled at, or, all those things. But yeah, just that like pulling aside, letting the person know, they didn't mean, like all those things that we would want done to ourselves is I kind of get myself in that mode before I move into the intervention.
Yes, for sure. And think it's so important when you said just that importance of being kind to ourselves as well. And you did mention in your book that we need to give ourselves permission to be vulnerable and to not know all of the answers right in the moment, and that we will all mess up sometimes, and that's just, a fact of life. Why is it so important to acknowledge this in ally work and to be kind to ourselves?
I don't think I said this in the book, but I've said it a lot in my workshops. I mean, I think being an ally is an ongoing journey of messing up. Like it just is. It's not if, it's when. We are all going to mess up. You're going to, and so it really is, we need to get really comfortable with the idea of messing up and figure out like how to make an appropriate apology, how to forgive ourselves, and then how to put in the work to get it right the next time. And then we're going to mess up again because that's, I mean, I think about, and it's not that, we're eventually going to know everything and we're never going to mess up. I mean, if we look at something, let's go back to our pronoun example, right? Well, unless we're all walking around with our pronoun on our shirts, which of course I highly recommend, I think we should all do it, but we're not, right? We're not. So we are moving through the world, basically doing the best we can at guessing people's pronouns in situations where, we don't have the opportunity to ask, or no one's sort of asked everyone. And I know there are some people who say, well, we should just use singular they for everyone. And, I know some people think that's the way to go, but I know that will also offend people. Like I know a lot of binary transgender people who worked really hard for their he pronoun or their she pronoun, and their faces, light up the first time they heard those pronouns got used for them. This was amazing, and they want those pronouns. They don't want to use they. So we're going to offend those people by using, right? So we're going to mess up with them if we use they. So what we do is we move through the world and we make the best possible guess that we can about people's pronouns. And I give the example of like, if I'm online for like, to see a matinee, and I've got like a bunch of, seniors around me, I'm not going to say, oh, I believe they were next. I'm going to say, I believe she was next. If I'm seeing someone who is presenting to me as what I'm thinking is, it's the most respectful thing I think I can do. If I'm waiting online for the Pride Festival, I'm probably going to use they for everyone, because I'm more likely to, not, but again, it's just this constant world of guesswork, unless we're walking around with our pronouns, on our forehead or whatever, wherever. So it's not even like, oh, I'm messing up because I don't know enough. It's like, we're going to be in situations where we're going to do the best we can and we're going to guess wrong. So it's really all about, figuring out how to make that apology and forgiving ourselves, which is huge. And it's not, I mean, I'm so forgiving of other people, and I'm so hard on myself when I make an error. So it's something I'm constantly working on too, but yeah, I mean, got to embrace it. Embrace the boo-boo.
Exactly. Well, and I think if you're not making mistakes, you're not doing the work, right?
Right.
Because it's bound to happen. We're all bound to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And how, for you, Jeannie, you've been involved in this work for so long now. When the work gets really difficult, what motivates you to stay driven and stay on course with the work?
I think, I don't like on my deathbed, I want to think back and I want to be able to say I helped make the world a better place. And I don't know why that's important to me, but it is. I mean, I think that was sort of one of the main motivators for me to get started in the work towards LGBTQ plus inclusion, initially. It's just important to me. And I think, when things do get difficult, I think we're actually living through a kind of a hard time for allies. And I can talk more about that if you want. But I think when there's pushback, for example, against me, so actually there's been less of this than I actually thought there would be. But when I do get the occasional, angry person who's like, how dare you as an ally, write a book about our community, this sort of, pushback about somehow because I wrote this book. And I know I have this pattern, which is like, I'm like, I quit, I'm done. I don't know if you do this, but I'm like, my immediate reaction is like, I'm done. Like I quit. And I now, like, I know that's my pattern now. So I'm like, okay, Jeannie, wait 12 hours, then you can quit. Like I know in the morning I'll feel fine, but it's like, it's so funny that that's my first reaction is like, I'm done. I just can't handle it. And then and then I think about it and I'm like, I think mostly what brings me back to like being centered in the work is just, I do think about just all the kind things that people have said about what my work has meant to them, what my book has meant to them, or my workshops, or even just some of the work I've done here locally to sort of create more inclusive environments. And I just think about those people, and that definitely keeps me going.
Did you want to speak to some of that work briefly?
Oh, about which one? I'm sorry.
You just mentioned that
creating inclusive spaces. Yeah.
Yeah. Some of the.
Yeah. So one of the things I did here that I'm really kind of proud of. So I'm a beach volleyball player. That's my main sport. And I run local tournaments, just free fun tournaments for the communities, the volleyball community. And so one of our volleyball community members transitioned from male to female, and I was able to, she asked me to sort of help support her to sort of re-enter the volleyball world, which of course sports, brings additional challenges and questions for people. And so I did that. But what I actually am really pleased about before she even transitioned or came out was that you're going to get a little volleyball background here, but in doubles co-ed volleyball, because the net height is different for men and women, right, there are certain rules about like the women are supposed to mostly serve the women and the men are supposed to mostly serve the men, so that everybody gets to play rather than everybody picking on, who they think is the weaker player. Well, what I found when I was running my co-ed tournaments was that the woman wasn't always the weaker player. And so I was like, well, this is silly. Why am I not, I like the idea of everybody gets a serve because then everybody gets to play and no one player gets picked on. But I'm like, why am I gendering this? So I actually completely ungendered. I call it an ungendered co-ed tournament because we kept the co-ed style, but I ungendered it. And I started calling the teammates. I said, you can pick which one's your giraffe and which one's your antelope. So the giraffe tends to be the taller animal, but not necessarily. So I just took gender right out of it. And I'm like, you can play with whoever you want. And we were getting that anyway. Like we were getting like two guys who wanted to play together. And I'm like, that's fine. You're the same level, or two very strong women who wanted to play. So anyway, long story short, I ungendered my volleyball tournaments before this individual transition. So I had created, without even realizing it for this person, this environment that she could walk back into. There was no angst at all about like, oh my gosh, are people going to be upset now if I play as a woman, or when do I come out? It's like, it doesn't matter what your gender is. You're going to play, just assign your animal, and just whichever, and every team was doing it again, which normalizes that behavior. Everybody's doing it. So I was just really proud that I had done that. And I think that meant a lot to people, that they could just step right in there and not even have to declare what their gender is, for that sport. So that was just one example.
Oh, that's amazing. I literally just got chills. Like I was just thinking, I was just like envisioning the potential of using this type of idea, even in like elementary schools, high school, like just spreading it across, because everyone does have different skill levels. It doesn't have to be gendered. That's just such an amazing example, and for that individual to be able to just step right into the game as though everything is just comfortable, and it's just amazing. Thank you so much, Jeannie. While reading your book, so many things really resonated with me throughout, and I mentioned this already, that I wish I had found this years ago. While you were writing your book, was there anything that stood out for you? Anything that you learned while writing the book, or anything that surprised you during the writing of your book?
I think the book was actually very easy to write, partly because, as I said, I had all this information in my head, and it was just sort of like this dump, which, so I wrote it fairly quickly. I think what I really learned came afterwards. I learned a lot about publishing companies and getting a book published. And that was actually the biggest shock to me. Was I had a publisher that was interested in it, and I thought, I was like, woohoo, I made it, I'm done. Like, whoo, I don't, because I was going to self-publish. I didn't think I'd find a publisher, and I did. But my biggest learning experience is that publishers actually, unless you're like in one of the big five ones, unless you're like J.K. Rowling, and publishers do almost nothing for you when it comes to like the publicity and the marketing and even a lot of the editing. I ended up having to reach out to like friends to, and I'm like, is it just, my company? And I started asking other people. It's like, no, that's how it is. Like the author is in charge of so much when it comes to all of that stuff. And that was a real shock to me. So that was probably the biggest learning experience for me, was just sort of the whole publishing process, and how much I really had to become my own, marketer and publicist. In hindsight, I wish I had hired someone. Like, I didn't know to do that. Before the book even came out, I think I should have hired a publicist to start getting the buzz around, and I didn't. So it's been pretty much mostly falling on me, and that was kind of shocking. Since the book, I have learned things, though. I mean, so the book came out in March. The book came out March 12th, 2020, if you can picture that. It was like, yeah, it was like day one of the national pandemic shutdown. It was awful. I never did my book launch or anything. It was really sad. So it was a very slow start. But since the book, I've been learning a lot of things, because I've been doing a lot of workshops, and I'm constantly learning as I go. And one of the things that I always say after my workshops is, use me as a resource. Like, contact me with any additional questions, and people do. And that's really what keeps me up to date. Is I get a lot of questions, a lot from teachers about, like, we're dealing with this situation, we don't know what to do. And it's like, it's really making me become a more savvy ally. So yeah.
Well, we're definitely going to be, and currently are, advocating for your book. It's such an excellent resource, and I truly believe it's essential reading for all educators, to really start to implement more change within schools so that everyone can feel safe. Because unfortunately, that's just not the reality yet in schools. And in the community at large. But yeah, really advocating for that. Is there anything exciting that you're doing right now? Anything new that you're working on, Jeannie, that you wanted to share?
So I'm constantly creating new workshops. My workshops have been doing very well. I just created a new one that's all like an hour-long workshop on pronouns, because people have so many questions about pronouns. So that's new. I created one on, I was asked to create one for Pride Month, 5 things allies should know about Pride. So workshops are constantly, I'm working on those. Every month I create a new 3-minute video with Savvy Ally tips. Those are on my YouTube channel at Savvy Ally Action. And I'm just starting to talk with my editor about possibly doing a second edition or an updated version, because I think there's just things are constantly changing, and the book's doing well enough that he's very interested in that. So my guess is I'm going to be starting to write fairly soon again. So.
That's awesome. And even I was thinking, I don't know if this would be something for down the road, but maybe even a young readers edition that could get, like, children involved. That would be awesome to see eventually as well. Something to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
You're like getting new ideas. Or maybe I'm putting too much on you. That would be interesting sometime if that could come to be.
Yeah, although it's funny. I mean, I don't know if you're finding this where you're located, but here, I mean, not little children, but here, the youth really seem to get it.
Yeah.
It's the parents who, the parents'
this
age,
version of the book could probably apply to like a lot of even like high school, college, university, even in the later years of elementary school. It's definitely at that reading level. Yeah. So maybe promoting this within like learning circles for younger readers would work as well. Yeah.
Thanks.
And with your book, I know I've mentioned a few times about how inspirational it has been to me. From my own personal experience, coming out as bisexual in my early 20s and having having it not received as well as it could have been, caused me for years to kind of hide away from my true authentic self until recently. In July of this year, I picked up a copy of your book, got midway through it, and it actually gave me the courage to come out to my husband and kids and to revisit, who I truly am. And I just wanted to put that out there with regards to, other people who may be in that position where, they're not feeling comfortable, or they're, hiding who they truly are. Why is your book so important then for others to read? And what message do you want readers to take away from your book?
Well, thank you for that story. That was really amazing. And congratulations on your coming out.
Thank you.
Yeah, and being authentic. Yeah, I mean, I guess my main message, we sort of started this conversation with the we wish we had this guidebook, and so, I think I wish I'd had this guidebook. And so my main message with the book is, if you're there, we're living in a confusing time. Like, things are constantly changing, and I think people are in general most of the people I'm running into are just big-hearted people who are scared to death that they're going to mess up. And so they're silenced. And so I think the main thing I want to do with my book is to help people get enough skills, understand that, messing up is part of the whole journey, and just get out there and start having conversations and start doing stuff. And that we're, that it's okay to do that. And I think that's, forgive yourself and understand that you're going to mess up, but it's really just to sort of break that silence that people have, that they're so scared that they aren't going to know the right words or whatever. So that, I think that's my main, point of the book.
Thank you so much, Jeannie. We're really, really hoping that, parents, educators get on board with this book, that even the idea of, parents or educators going through this book with groups of students could work, where they're guiding them through teaching them, because the more that we normalize it, the more it'll be normal for, you know what I mean? Like, it'll be the new normal, where everybody has a space, an identity where they feel comfortable sharing. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jeannie. We really, really appreciate it. I can't tell you enough how much we appreciate being able to meet with you today and discuss these important topics.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This was super fun, and it was nice to get to know you too.
You too. Thank you, Jeannie.
Bye.
If you don't want to miss any of our upcoming videos, make sure that you hit the subscribe button below, as well as the notifications. And you can also visit our website, chaptersforchange.com, for educational resources and to see what we're up to. See you soon.